If there is anything a libertarian must be squarely and totally against, it is involuntary servitude, forced labor, an act which denies the most elemental right of self-ownership. Liberty and slavery have ever been recognized to be polar opposites. The libertarian, therefore, is totally opposed to slavery. There is one exception: the punishment of criminals who had themselves aggressed against or enslaved their victims. Such punishment in a libertarian system would at least involve forcing the criminal to work in order to pay restitution to his victim. An academic question nowadays, one might object. But is it really? For what is slavery but A, forcing people to work at tasks the slave master wishes, and B, paying them either pure subsistence, or at any rate less than the slave would have accepted voluntarily? In short, forced labor at below free market wages. Thus, are we really free of slavery, of involuntary servitude in present-day America? Is the prohibition against involuntary servitude of the 13th Amendment really being obeyed? Significantly, the 13th Amendment's only exception is the punishment of convicted criminals, mentioned previously. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. There can be no more blatant case of involuntary servitude than our entire system of conscription. Every youth is forced to register with the Selective Service System when he turns 18. He is compelled to carry his draft card at all times, and at whatever time the federal government deems fit, he is seized by the authorities and inducted into the armed forces. There, his body and will are no longer his own. He is subject to the dictates of the government, and he can be forced to kill and to place his own life in jeopardy if the authorities so decree. What else is involuntary servitude, if not the draft? The utilitarian aspect permeates the argument for the conscription system. Thus the government uses the argument, who will defend us against foreign attack if we do not employ coercion and conscript our defenders? There are several rebuttals for a libertarian to make to this line of reasoning. In the first place, if you and I and our next-door neighbor think that we need defending, we have no moral right to use coercion, the bayonet or the revolver, to force someone else to defend us. This act of conscripting is just as much a deed of unjustifiable aggression, of kidnapping and possibly murder, as the alleged aggression we are trying to guard ourselves against in the first place. If we add that the draftees owe their bodies and their lives, if necessary, to society, or to their country, then we must retort, who is this society, or this country, that is being used as a talisman to justify enslavement? It is simply all individuals in the territorial area except the youths being conscripted. Society and country are in this case mythical abstractions that are being used to cloak the naked use of coercion to promote the interests of specific individuals. Secondly, to move to the utilitarian plane, why is it considered necessary to conscript defenders? No one is conscripted on the free market. Yet on that market people obtain, through voluntary purchase and sale, every conceivable manner of goods and services, even the most necessary ones. On the market, people can and do obtain food, shelter, clothing, medical care, etc. Why can't they hire defenders as well? Indeed, there are plenty of people being hired every day to perform dangerous services. Forest firefighters, rangers, test pilots, and police and private guards and watchmen. Why can't soldiers be hired in the same way? Or, to put it another way, the government employs countless thousands of people for all sorts of services, from truck drivers to scientists to typists. How is it that none of these people have to be conscripted? Why is there no shortage of these occupations to supposedly force the government to resort to compulsion to obtain them? To go a step further, even within the Army, there is no shortage of officers and no need to draft them. No one conscripts generals or admirals. The answer to these questions is simple. There is no shortage of government typists because the government goes out on the market and hires them at the market wage. There is no shortage of generals because they are paid handsomely in salaries, perquisites, and pensions. There is a shortage of buck privates because their pay is, or was until very recently, abysmally below the market wage. For years, even including the monetary value of the free food, shelter, and other services supplied the GIs, the earnings of the buck private were something like 1/2 the salary he could have earned in civilian life. For years it has been known that the way to induce people to volunteer for hazardous jobs is to pay them extra as compensation. But the government has been paying the men half of what they could earn in private life. There is also the special disgrace of the doctor's draft, in which physicians are subject to the draft at ages far beyond anyone else. Are doctors then to be penalized for their entry into the profession of medicine? What is the moral justification for onerous burdens placed on this particular and vitally important profession? Is this the way to cure the shortage of doctors? To put every man on notice that if he becomes a physician, he will be sure to be drafted, and at a specially late age? Once again, the armed forces' need for doctors could easily be satisfied if the government were willing to pay physicians the market salary, plus enough to compensate them for the hazardous labor. If the government wishes to hire nuclear physicists or think tank strategists, it finds ways of doing so at extremely handsome salaries. Are doctors lower forms of humanity?